A fanfiction that started on AO3 has just been sold to a traditional publisher for 7 figures, and people have a lot to say about it. The fic in question is All the Young Dudes by Miss King Bean 89, and it's a beloved story about the Harry Potter universe. And as someone who has read and written fanfiction, but also someone who wants to one day become a published author, I have very mixed feelings about this. Because on one hand, I am genuinely happy for the author. Fanfiction writers are some of the most passionate storytellers on the internet. But on the other hand, this trend raises a lot of questions regarding originality, creativity, and the future of publishing. Because not everyone is an inventor. Many people are replicators. But the question that we have to ask ourselves here is, when fanfiction enters the publishing industry, is it the natural evolution of storytelling, or is it the commodification of fandom? Hello, my gorgeous viewers and readers. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. I hope your weekend was filled with cold, sunny walks around the city, heartwarming meals, and maybe a little bit of internet drama in the literary world. Because recently, a piece of fan fiction has been making headlines in the publishing industry. Allegedly, this incredibly popular and very beloved story called All the Young Dudes, which was originally posted on AO3, has reportedly been acquired by a major publisher in a 7-figure deal. And if you have spent any time in fandom spaces, more specifically on Tumblr around the 2010s, you know how important and iconic this fanfiction is. For years, this story was considered one of the most important stories of the Harry Potter universe, but more specifically from the Marauders fandom. In fact, there are many Harry Potter fans that consider this story actual canon. That is how iconic and important and beloved this story is. And yet, this news has sparked a massive debate online, because while some people are celebrating this as a victory for fanfiction writers, some other people are thinking that this will create a precedent within the publishing industry. And as someone who reads fanfiction and who used to write fanfiction, but also as someone who loves traditional publishing and someone who wants to become a published author one day, I find myself in the middle. Because this situation is not as simple as fanfiction good versus fanfiction bad. There are extremely real ethical, artistic, and economic questions here at play. So today I want to talk about why fanfiction getting published is nothing new, why there are so many people who are uncomfortable with fanfiction getting published, and why the conversation about originality in art is much more complicated than we like to admit. Let's start. Before we get into the controversy, we need to acknowledge something important. Fanfiction entering traditional publishing is not a new phenomenon in the slightest. So the best example that I have is After. This story is actually originated from a Harry Styles One Direction fanfiction, or The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood, which is a really beloved story or romance story, actually originated from a Star Wars fanfiction where Kylo Ren and Rey are the main characters. And the best example of all is 50 Shades of Grey. This is actually a Twilight fanfiction that got published in around the 2008, more or less, if I remember correctly. So yeah, there are so many success stories within the traditional publishing that actually originated from fanfiction. And even outside explicit fanfiction, writers have always taken inspiration from older stories. Shakespeare actually wrote about old myths, or modern fantasy always borrows from Tolkien, and even science fiction actually takes all the traditions within science fiction. So storytelling has always been repetitive in some way or another. But why are people so uncomfortable with fan fiction actually repeating stories? Let's talk about it. One of the most common criticisms I've seen online is the idea that fan fiction authors are simply taking someone else's creative work and using it for their own benefit. And in some cases, I think this criticism is fair, and I think they are low-key right, because certain fan fictions are very clearly rooted in someone else's intellectual property. For example, and I already know I'm going to get in trouble, but works like Manacled draw heavy inspiration on other people's universes and stories. So if you read the book, or if you read the original story, Manacled, you will clearly see that the author actually draws heavy inspiration from the Harry Potter universe, but also inspiration on The Handmaid's Tale. It is very obvious. But this is not the case in many other stories or in many other published artworks. Like if you see, for example, the love hypothesis, as I've talked about earlier, the story is not influenced by the universe at all. Like if you have read the book, you know that it is not related to Star Wars at all. There are only certain key parts that draw inspiration from Star Wars, which is actually the two characters or the two main characters. But in fact, when you read the story, you see that there is no connection with the universe whatsoever. So the artistic context in this example is minimal. And here is where the line between fan fiction and original work fiction becomes incredibly blurry, because when does inspiration stop being inspiration and becomes something new? Another argument I see frequently is the idea that fandom operates under one unwritten social contract, and is that fandom only exists purely as a labor of love, meaning that fans create art, stories, or create content just because they love the original work. No money involved, no petitions, they only do it as an act of love. But here is where I find the argument a little inconsistent, because in many fandom spaces, artists are already selling their fan art. If you go to anime conventions, you will see plenty of artists selling prints of their own favorite anime characters or their favorite couples. Or if you go online, you will see plenty of posters or plenty of merchandise that is inspired from your favorite films or your favorite series. And no one has a problem with that. Everyone loves merchandise. I love merchandise. But why is it suddenly a problem when fan fiction writers also want to benefit from their own art? Why is everyone so happy with merchandise or with art? Or why do artists can't sell prints of their own favorite character, but then it becomes a problem when writers want to benefit from their art too? The third criticism is probably the most practical one. Some readers actually worry that if publishers start acquiring fanfiction-inspired stories, that these might reduce the opportunity for original manuscripts. Basically, in other words, if a publisher already knows that a fanfiction already has a built-in audience, why would they take a risk with an unknown story? And honestly, I don't find it entirely unreasonable. Because at the end of the day, publishing is a business, and businesses will always go for the safest deal that will maximize all the gains, right? But this is not something that only happens in the literary world. In fact, if you go to the film industry, for example, there are plenty of adaptations and different franchises that have done the same thing over and over again, right? We have the Marvel universe, for example, all the Disney princesses or all the original stories like the Lion King that have 100 different remakes, right? And that is why as well the publishing industry creates and publishes like celebrity memoirs or trending genres and tropes, because they know that these will maximize the gain. So again, maybe the issue is not fan fiction, but how risk averse the industry has actually become. Like the publishing industry is not taking risks anymore. They are not looking at the art for the art. They are looking at the art for the charts. And that is the main issue within the publishing industry, but also within the art industry. This happens with films. This happens with music. Everything is low risk because people do not want to take take their chances. Going back to the topic of fanfiction, here is why I find this conversation so hypocritical. Because for years, people on the internet have always insisted that fanfiction deserves respect. Some readers are constantly mentioning how many fanfictions are much better than any traditionally published work. And in fact, many fandoms, or all the fandoms that I've been in, say that fan fiction writers actually are amazing storytellers, right? But the moment fandom or fan fiction enters traditional publishing, suddenly everyone has a problem with it. Now we start hearing things like it's not original work, it's not real literature, or it shouldn't be monetized. And this is such a big contradiction, because if we are saying that fan fiction writers are incredibly talented artists, or that fan fiction should be respected, or that the quality of many fan fictions are better than many traditionally published work, then that means that successes like this should be celebrated. As a quick conclusion, I personally believe that two truths can exist in this topic, or in the topic of fandom. Because whilst I do believe that there are some authors that are benefiting from others' work, meaning that they are taking original context or original stories and actually piggybacking from it, so creating their own stories within the universe and taking the other author's universe as a context, there are also some authors that are creating original work from or within fandoms. So even though they are taking the original context, the context that they are taking is so minimal that it could actually be considered an original story. And even within fanfiction itself, writers are actually bringing new emotional depth, themes, or perspectives to familiar stories. So in this sense, I believe that fanfiction doesn't actually just imitate the art, it actually interprets it differently. And perhaps the success of fanfiction works like All the Young Dudes simply proves something that readers have always been saying all along, that art can come in many forms, and it can come from anywhere, from traditional publishers, from fanfiction, from independent artists. We can see, or we can find art everywhere. And maybe the real question isn't if fanfiction belongs in traditional publishing. Maybe the real question is, where do we draw the line between invention and imitation? That's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you enjoyed this piece of gossip. Now, before we leave, I would love to ask you two questions. So the first question is, have you ever read fanfiction? And if you have, I would love to know, what is your favorite fanfic that you have ever read? It does not matter the fandom, it does not matter what you enjoy. I do not judge. I just want to read more fanfiction. I have read my fair share of strange things, so I will not be easily scared. Now, before you leave again, if you like this video, please make sure that you like this video and that subscribe to my channel. And also, please make sure that you follow me on my social media. I post there every day. But yeah, that's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.